Hi, my name is Troy McMahon, and you are joining us for the second week of our series called Discovering God. You know, if you've ever had pressing questions about who God is, how He works, well, you're not alone. And throughout this series, we are walking with the real-life persons of Moses, and we're taking a look at the very beginning of the book of Exodus. That's the second book in the Bible, in the Old Testament. And through this journey, we're going to discover some of the unique truths about who God is and how He works. Now, the deeper that we strive to understand God and how He works, well, the more we're going to be able to apply His wisdom to our everyday lives. Today, well, we want to just kind of scratch the surface to look at God's justice, His mercy, and His grace. Now, it seems like every time we turn on the news, we're confronted by some sort of injustice, right? I mean, just this past week, the war in Ukraine, it hit the 1-year anniversary, and they reflected back on the thousands and thousands of Ukrainians who have died, and even more Russian casualties from what appears to be this unjust invasion of a country for political gain. And I'll tell you, if you're like me and you watch that and you hear about it, you want justice. I mean, things have to be made right. Someone has to pay. But we don't always want pure justice, do we? Right? We don't really want that pure justice when we are on the receiving end of it. So, how does God's justice play out in our lives? Let's see if we can find some answers today in our true source, the Bible. So we're going to dive into the journey with Moses. And at this point in the story, he is about 40 years old. Now, if we think back, after he was saved by his mother during this period of unjust killing of innocent children for political power and gain, well, Moses, he is adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He's raised in the palace of the Egyptian king. So Moses finds himself, in the lap of luxury. He finds himself with privilege, all the while that his people, the Hebrews, or they're called the Israelites, or the Jews, they find themselves as Egyptian slaves to the empire. They find themselves as forced labor to build a kingdom that they would gain no benefit from. Hey, if you would just take a quick look at this clip that maybe I think can help set up our story today.
And more splendid than any other monument in Upper or Lower Egypt. Moses! Look, fate has turned our little misadventure into a great opportunity. I know Father will be so pleased with what you are.
Put your back into it! Faster!
And this is just the beginning. A gateway will open to an entire new city of white limestone, more dazzling than the sun. And here, a statue of Hapi, god of the
Hurry!
two great column halls.
Stop it!
No.
Somebody's got to stop this!
There's nothing that we can do.
Stop it! Stop! Stop it! Leave that man alone!
Moses!
Out of my way! Move!
No.
Who did this?
Up there! It's him! There!
You know, I just love the Prince of Egypt video. I got to tell you, it's probably, if not the best, one of the best biblically animated movies of all time. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't got a chance to watch it, you can do so. Find it somewhere on some streaming service. And it really, I think, gives you a great insight into the life of Moses. But hey, for us, let's go ahead and let's dive into the Bible to see if we can maybe unpack this story even more. Here's what we read in Exodus chapter 2. Many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews. And he saw how hard they were forced to work. And during this visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. And after looking in all directions to make sure that no one was watching, Moses, he killed the Egyptian and he hid his body in the sand. I mean, Moses had this sense of justice, right? He recognized that in this world, there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. However, in the midst of this moment, you can see that his sense of justice just overcame him. And so he decides that, man, if there is something unjustly happening, that he has to respond. And so he chooses to take justice in his own hands, and he murders the Egyptian who was beating his fellow Hebrew. Now, I mean, Moses must have been feeling kind of all right about what he'd done, because the very next day, he's out walking among his people. And we read, the next day when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw two Hebrew men fighting. "Why are you beating up on your friend?" And Moses said to the one who had started the fight. I find, isn't it interesting, right? Here Moses is calling out his fellow Hebrews for physically being violent with each other. When just the day before, Moses, well, he'd murdered a man. Now, psychologists, they've documented that many times the thing that bothers us most in other people is the very thing that we personally struggle with. Okay, let's read on. Well, the man replied, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" Well, then Moses was afraid, thinking, everyone knows what I did. And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened, and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. Let me ask, have you ever been caught red-handed? I know I have. Man, as I was working on this talk, I just had this recollection and this flashback to this time when I was 12 years old. And as a 12-year-old, I was doing rebellious things that kids do. Well, I'd acquired this pack of cigarettes, and I was going to smoke it later in the woods that were around my house. Well, that day I remember coming into my house, and I had the pack of cigarettes in my pocket. And then I went to my room, and I was sitting on my bed. Now, for whatever reason, I left my door open. And where my bed was and where the living room was this direct view. And my mom was sitting on the couch. Well, our eyes met. And I can remember kind of even like it was yesterday. I pulled my hand gingerly out of my pocket, and her spidey sense just went all crazy. So she got up and she walked directly to my room and she just asked me, "What's up, Troy?" And of course, my profound response was, "Well, nothing, Mom." And then she looked at me and she said, "Troy, what's in your pocket?" I knew I was dead to right. So I pulled out the pack of cigarettes and I looked into my mother's eyes. And I'm telling you, I was expecting justice. I was expecting her to raise her voice, to scold me, to ground me. But she just stood there, looking in my eyes, and she wept. You know, I could handle my mother yelling at me, but not crying. Now, for the record, Dad came home later, and yes, I was grounded after a very long dissertation on the negative effects of smoking and the fact that I had disobeyed the McMahon family values. Well, back to Moses. Once he realizes that justice is coming this way, well, he fled. He ran. At 12, well, I just didn't have that option. You see, the same justice that Moses dished out to the Egyptian was the same justice that Pharaoh was going to give to Moses. A life for a life. Now Moses, not wanting to give up his life so justice could be done, he runs far away to the land of Midian. He keeps his life, but he loses everything. Everything that he'd ever had. Everything that he'd ever known. Can you just imagine? Or do that with me. Imagine right now for a moment that whatever you have, both the good and the bad of your current life, you just run away from and you completely leave it behind. After growing up in the big city with all the luxury for 40 years, Moses now has nothing. Well, the story continues. You see, when Moses arrived in Midian, he sat down beside a well. Now, the priest of Midian, he had 7 daughters who came to the well to draw water and fill the water troughs for their father's flock. But some other shepherds, they came and they chased him away. So Moses, he jumps up, he rescues the girl from the shepherd, and then he drew water for their flocks. The story continues. Well, when the girls return to Reuel, their father, he asks, "Why are you back so soon today?" "Well, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. And then he drew water for us, and he watered our flocks." "Well, then where is he?" their father asks. "Why did you leave him out there? Invite him to come and eat with us." Well, Moses accepted the invitation, and he settled there with him. And in time, Reuel gave Moses his daughter Zipporah to be his wife. And later, she gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom. For he explained, "I have been a foreigner in a foreign land." You see, right here, Moses, again, he witnesses another injustice against the women of the land. And he chooses to take action. But as far as we can tell, well, he doesn't kill anyone this time. Now, Moses, he goes on to live in the land. He marries one of the women that he saves, and he starts a family. But if you would, just pause for a second and reflect back on the story we've been navigating through. And notice that the direct actions of God are not mentioned at all in this story. You see, much like last week and in the previous chapter, we're seeing God's will, His sovereignty, His providence at play here. God certainly could have allowed Moses to be caught, could have allowed Moses to be put to death. But in His mercy, He allows Moses to escape. Now, not only that, Moses is given another chance to stand up for others experiencing injustice. Now, only this time, he tones it down. He doesn't kill anyone. You see, pursuing biblical justice, it means that you and I, we follow God's way to make right that which is wrong. You see, pursuing biblical justice means we must always balance justice with grace and mercy. You see, our God is a God of both justice and mercy. And friends, that's a good thing. You see, if God were only a God of justice, well, if that's the case, then we'd be without hope, because we'd have to pay the price. But if God were a God of only mercy, well, then there would be no wrong. Now, fast forward. If you read through the book of Exodus, and I would encourage you to do so, and if you read into the book of Deuteronomy and Numbers and Leviticus, you see that God uses Moses to set up this amazing justice system. It starts with those 10 commandments and establishing the law for all the Jews. And these laws, they would become the guiding principle for the next 1,500 years. And then it happened. Well, actually, he happened. Jesus. You see, Jesus comes to bring balance. Balance to justice and mercy. And he does so in the form of grace. And here's my best understanding. You see, with justice, right? With justice, a wrong has been committed, a debt is owed, and someone has to pay. And when it comes to mercy, right? With mercy, well, something has been wrong, the debt is owed, but no one has to pay. But with grace, there is a debt. There is something that is owed. There is a consequence that has to happen, but someone else takes on the debt. Someone else pays the price. And in Jesus, we found that Jesus, well, he paid it all. You see, Scripture teaches us that the penalty of sin is death. That's justice. But that God, in his great love for us, sent Jesus to take that punishment on our behalf. My friends, that is grace. We see Jesus, God in the flesh, he put this into action. On Good Friday, right, the day of Jesus' death, Peter would deny that he ever knew Jesus 3 times. And this had to be so hurtful because just hours before, Peter said, I would die for you, Jesus. Yet it was Jesus who ended up dying. Not only for Peter, but for me, for you, for all of us. He took our place. But watch Jesus, right? After his resurrection and his interaction with Simon Peter would demonstrate the power of grace. We read in John chapter 20, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied, you know I love you. Then feed my lambs. And Jesus told him, right? Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know that I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt that Jesus asked him a question. A third time he says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. 3 denials. 3 affirmations. So friends, what do we do? What do we do with this knowledge today? How do we internalize and put it into action? My friends, here is what you absolutely need to know. What Jesus demonstrated with Peter, what he wants to demonstrate with us is that our past sins, they do not control our future decisions. Too often, we think that our past mistakes, they disqualify us from God's goodness. Because of a mistake that we've made, I mean, God, he's never going to allow us, right, to be happy or to find a great spouse or to have an amazing job or to buy that dream home or to raise kids. In general, that God won't give us a second chance. But I tell for you and I to truly embrace God's justice and his grace, we have to start by recognizing our mistakes and, yes, our sin. We have to recognize when we have been unjust. I mean, when Jesus was anointed by this notoriously sinful woman, people began to mutter to themselves, should he be shunned? But Jesus responds with this. He says, I tell you, her sins, and they are many, they have been forgiven. So she has shown me much love. But a person who is forgiven little shows only a little love. My friends, Jesus is fully aware of my sin. He is fully aware of your sin. He recognizes where we have fallen short in so many areas of our lives. Yet, he is still willing to offer us grace and take our punishment himself. My friends, I just want to encourage you. Take every day as an opportunity to embrace more of Jesus' grace. You do not need to be clean before you come to God. No. You come to God, and He will make you clean. I just got to tell you, across our physical campuses of Restore this week, people are making a decision to publicly accept this grace, this mercy offered in Jesus, to recognize their sins and their inability to save themselves, and to say to Jesus, yes, I will follow you. I receive you as my Lord and Savior, and be baptized, to literally have their old selves left behind and to become new. I just want to say, if you're watching this right now and you've been on this journey and you're at this point where you're going like, I long for this to be a part of it. I long for this to be a part of my life. If you're at that point, let's take this journey together. You can say yes to Jesus right where you are. You can make this decision to be baptized. And if you're ready to make that choice, here's what I want you to do. Right now, wherever you are, take out your phone, all right? Take out your computer, and I want you to email. Email me at troy@restorecc.org. If you do that, then I'll respond to you. We can create a dialogue and help you take this next powerful step in going public with your faith. Now, each week of this series, we're going to have a memory verse. I mean, we want to take these words from God that we can put in our heart, we can put in our head, that we literally can put in our soul to encourage us, to inspire us, to challenge us to discover who God really is. So this week, our memory verse, it comes out of Psalms. The book of Psalms, that would be in the Old Testament. If you kind of had a paper Bible, you could open it up and it would open up right in the middle to Psalms. If you've got this digitally, you can go to Psalms and look for Psalms 145. Here's our memory verse. So wherever you are, I want you to say this out loud with me. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. The Lord is merciful and compassionate, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. The Lord is good to everyone. All right, we're going to say that again. Here we go. Count of 3. 1, 2, 3. The Lord is merciful and compassionate, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. The Lord is good to everyone. All right, third time. Just do me a favor. Kind of close your eyes and see what words you can recite out loud. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. The Lord is merciful and compassionate, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. The Lord is good to everyone. You know, my friends, because Moses discovered God's justice, His mercy, His grace, well, then God was ready to use Moses in a profound way to change the course and direction of His chosen people. Here's what we read at the end of Exodus chapter 2. Years passed and the king of Egypt died. But the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. And they cried out for help, and their cries rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He looked down on the people of Israel, and He knew it was time to act. You know, I truly believe God wants to use each one of us to discover who He is. And when you and I discover who God is, then He kind of puts us in this position to profoundly use us to change the spiritual landscape of our everyday community. So, my friends, there is much work to be done. Let's go.